deep in the spiraling arms of the Andromeda Galaxy, on a station that looked like someone had crossed a university library with a torture chamber, sat the Galactic Intelligence Testing Facility. The locals called it Cerebellum Prime, though most species just called it that place where dreams go to die. The facility's crown jewel was room 847B, where Instructor Vex Thornbottom held court over the galaxy's most feared examination. Vex was a Zephyrian, which meant he had 4 arms, purple skin that shifted to angry red when frustrated, and an ego roughly the size of a small moon. He'd been administering this particular test for 3 centuries, and in all that time exactly 0 candidates had made it past question 3. 0. Not 1. Not even close. Vex took enormous pride in this statistic. He'd even had it engraved on a plaque above his desk, 847 years without a single success, excellence in academic futility. On this particular Tuesday, which was actually a Flurban day in Galactic Standard Time but who's keeping track, Vex was preparing for what he assumed would be another routine intellectual massacre. He'd polished his 4 pairs of reading glasses, organized his intimidation notes, and practiced his "you're not smart enough" sneer in the mirror. That's when Jake Martinez walked in. Jake was human, which was already weird enough. Humans were relatively new to the galactic scene, and most aliens still thought of them as those bipedal weirdos who put cheese on everything. He was about 30, with the kind of casual confidence that came from either supreme intelligence or supreme ignorance. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. "Excuse me," Jake said, looking around the chamber with its floating holographic equations and ominous crystalline testing pods. "Is this where I sign up for the pilot's license renewal?" Vex's eyes lit up with predatory glee. "A human? Oh, this would be delicious." "No, my geometrically challenged friend," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is the Galactic Intelligence Examination, the most difficult test in known space." "Cool," Jake said, completely missing the warning. "I've got some time to kill. My ship's getting refueled anyway." Vex could barely contain his excitement. "Very well then. Please take a seat in testing pod Alpha." He gestured with all 4 arms toward what looked like an electric chair designed by committee. As Jake settled in, Vex began his traditional pre-test speech. "You should know, candidate, that this examination has never been completed. In 847 years of administration, across 17,000 different species, not one being has progressed beyond question 3. The test is designed to challenge the very limits of intelligence, logic and reason." Jake said, trying to figure out which button reclined the seat. "The questions become progressively more difficult," Vex continued, warming to his favorite subject. "They span multiple dimensions of thought, incorporating advanced mathematics, quantum mechanics, temporal paradoxes, to philosophical concepts that have driven lesser minds to madness." "Sounds fun," Jake replied. "Hey, do you guys have any snacks? I'm thinking something crunchy." Vex blinked all 6 of his eyes in sequence. "Snacks?" "Eh? Yeah, you know, like chips or pretzels, brain food. I think better when I'm munching." This was already going off script, but Vex recovered quickly. "There are no snacks in the testing chamber. This is a place of serious intellectual." "No worries," Jake interrupted. "I've got some beef jerky in my pocket. Let's do this thing." The first question materialized in glowing holographic text above Jake's pod, in a 17-dimensional hyperspace matrix. "Calculate the recursive probability of quantum flux resonance when subjected to temporal inversion fields of magnitude 7.34 x 1047. Vex leaned back in his chair, already preparing his better luck next time speech. This was typically where candidates broke down crying or requested immediate psychiatric evaluation. Jake squinted at the equation for about 3 seconds. "Oh, that's easy. It's pi times the square root of awesome, divided by the probability that this question actually means something." so basically 42.7 recurring. The testing computer chimed cheerfully. Correct. Meal? Vex's purple skin shifted to a light lavender of confusion. That's not possible. The question has 17 subcomponents and requires at least 47 minutes of calculation. Nah, Jake said, pulling out a piece of beef jerky. You just have to think about it sideways. Like if you've got 17 dimensions, that's really just 3 dimensions showing off. Math is math, you know. Question 2 appeared. Resolve the ontological paradox of existence within the framework of multiversal consciousness theory, accounting for both quantum uncertainty and the observer effect in nonlinear temporal mechanics. Jake chewed thoughtfully on his jerky. Well, if a tree falls in a forest and nobody's around to hear it, it probably makes a sound unless it's in a parallel universe where trees don't make sounds when they fall. In which case it depends on whether consciousness is an emergent property or a fundamental force. So the answer is yes, no, and maybe simultaneously until someone checks. Correct. BX. The other test takers in the room were starting to notice. Blorgan the Mighty, a massive warrior scholar from the Crab Nebula, had been stuck on question 1 for 2 hours. Zach the scholar, whose species had invented mathematics before Earth had finished cooling, was rocking back and forth muttering about the impossibility of question 2. Prin the perfectionist had filled out a formal complaint about the test's unreasonable difficulty standards. Meanwhile, Jake was cruising through questions like he was reading a grocery list. Question 5. Define the relationship between dark matter and consciousness in terms of 11-dimensional string theory. Jake, dark matter is basically the universe's way of being mysterious. It's like the friend who never posts on social media but somehow knows everything. Consciousness is what happens when matter gets bored and decides to think about itself. In 11 dimensions, they're probably roommates. Correct. Nay. Question 8. Calculate the entropy decay of a collapsing black hole while accounting for Hawking radiation and information paradox resolution. Jake, okay, so black holes are basically cosmic vacuum cleaners that got a little too enthusiastic. The entropy decay is proportional to how fast the black hole is asking itself, did I leave the oven on? The information paradox is solved by recognizing that the universe has backup files. Correct. Mont. By question 12, Vex was no longer purple. He'd shifted through confused lavender, bewildered blue, and was now approaching worried green. This is unprecedented, he muttered, frantically checking his testing manuals. The questions are functioning properly. The computer confirms all answers are correct. But this is impossible. Blorgan the Mighty stood up abruptly. I quit, he announced. If this human child can solve these problems while eating dried meat, then I clearly know nothing. He stomped out, his warrior pride in tatters. Zach had stopped muttering and was now openly staring at Jake. How? He whispered. Jake looked over cheerfully. How what? How are you solving problems that have stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy? I don't know, Jake admitted. I'm just answering the questions. They're not that hard if you don't overthink them. Question 15 appeared. Prove or disprove the existence of universal truth within the context of relative reality frameworks. Jake barely glanced at it. Universal truth exists, but it's subjective to each observer's frame of reference, which means it's both universal and not universal at the same time. It's like asking whether pizza is objectively delicious. Yes, it is. But also that depends on whether you like pizza. Truth is just pizza for your brain. Correct. Me. Prin the perfectionist gathered her belongings with dignity. I refuse to participate in whatever this is, she announced. Either this test has been compromised, or reality has been compromised, and either way I want no part of it. As the other candidates filed out in various states of intellectual defeat, Vex realized he was witnessing something that shouldn't exist, but a being who was casually solving problems designed to be unsolvable. 15 correct answers, he said weakly. In the history of this examination, the highest previous score was 2.5. What was the half? Jake asked, genuinely curious. Partial credit for showing their work before having a nervous breakdown. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense. Hey, when do we get to the hard questions? Vex's skin had now achieved a color that wasn't technically possible in normal space-time, a sort of panicked chartreuse with undertones of existential dread. He'd called for backup 17 minutes ago, but his hands were shaking too much to operate the communicator properly. Question 16 materialized with what seemed like vindictive pleasure, in a closed temporal loop where causality is reversed, but calculate the probability matrix of events that both cause and prevent their own existence. Jake was halfway through his second piece of beef jerky. Oh, that's like my cousin Eddie's relationship with his ex-wife. They got divorced because they got married. But they only got married because they knew they'd get divorced. The probability is exactly 100% because temporal loops don't care about logic. They just keep looping until someone gets tired and breaks the cycle. Correct. Well, that's not even remotely how temporal mechanics work. Vex shrieked. Sure it is, Jake said reasonably. Time is just space that got impatient. If you think about it linearly, you'll tie yourself in knots. But if you think about it like a soap opera, everything makes perfect sense. Question 18 involved multi-dimensional physics and the theoretical mechanics of universe creation. Jake solved it by comparing it to making pancakes. You need the right ingredients, proper timing, and you have to flip it at exactly the right moment or the whole thing falls apart. The testing computer was starting to sound confused in its cheerful confirmations. Correct somehow? By question 22, word had spread throughout Cerebellum Prime. Auxiliary Instructor Griselda Fangsworth burst through the chamber doors, her tentacles writhing with academic fury. Griselda was a Kraken-class intellectual, which meant she had an IQ measured in scientific notation and a personality like a caffeinated hurricane. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, all 12 of her eye stalks swiveling to focus on Jake. I've been monitoring the test responses from my office. Either our entire testing system has suffered a catastrophic failure, or this human is achieving the impossible. I'm going with impossible, Vex whispered. He just solved the infinite recursion paradox by comparing it to a dog chasing its own tail. Griselda examined the holographic display showing Jake's progress. Preposterous. Question 25 requires a minimum of 14 advanced degrees in theoretical impossibility just to understand what it's asking. Question 25 hung in the air like a challenge to sanity itself. Reconcile the paradox of infinite regression within finite consciousness by establishing a framework for understanding itself. Jake scratched his head. Okay, so this is basically asking how you can think about thinking without your brain exploding from too much meta. The answer is you don't try to understand understanding, you just understand things. And understanding happens as a side effect. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You can't, but you don't need to because you're already using them. Correct. Griselda's tentacles went rigid with shock. That's actually philosophically sound. Thanks, Jake said. I took a philosophy class in college. Also, I watch a lot of movies, and this feels like one of those the answer was inside you all along situations. By question 28, Jake had accidentally solved a 500-year-old mathematical theorem that had stumped the greatest minds of the Centauri collective. He'd done it while asking for directions to the bathroom. The bathroom's down the hall, Vex had replied automatically, but how did you just prove the infinite prime conjecture? I wasn't trying to prove anything, Jake said. I was just wondering if there's a pattern to finding restrooms in space stations. Turns out there is, and it's the same pattern that governs the distribution of prime numbers in infinite series. Makes sense when you think about it. Both involve finding something specific in a vast, seemingly random space. The testing chamber was now filled with faculty members, graduate students, and janitors who'd abandoned their duties to witness what was either the greatest intellectual achievement in galactic history or the most elaborate practical joke ever conceived. Question 30 appeared with fanfare. Define the relationship between consciousness and reality in a multiverse where both are emergent properties of quantum foam fluctuations. Jake didn't even pause. Consciousness and reality are like dance partners. Reality leads, consciousness follows, but sometimes consciousness gets creative and tries to lead, which is how you get weird stuff like art and philosophy and people who put pineapple on pizza in a multiverse. They're all dancing to different songs, but it's still basically the same dance. Correct. Where? The chamber fell silent except for the sound of several advanced civilizations having their worldviews quietly shattered. The news spread across the galaxy faster than bad cafeteria food rumors. Within an hour, Holonet reporters were setting up equipment outside Cerebellum Prime. Betting pools opened on 17 different worlds. The Galactic Stock Exchange suspended trading in impossibility futures due to unprecedented volatility. Admiral Buzzcut McGillicuddy, the gruff military leader of the Terran Defense Force, burst into the testing chamber wearing his full-dress uniform and an expression that suggested he'd rather be wrestling space pirates. "What's this I hear about one of my pilots breaking some fancy alien brain test?" he barked. Then "Your pilot?" Vex squeaked. "This human belongs to your military." Jake Martinez, registration number TDF47739, McGillicuddy confirmed, consulting his datapad. Got lost on his way back from a routine supply run. Been looking for him for 3 days. He glared at Jake. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing?" "Taking a test, sir," Jake replied. "They said it was the hardest test in the galaxy, so I figured why not give it a shot." "And you're actually passing this thing?" "So far, so good. We're up to question 31. McGillicuddy's weathered face cracked into something resembling a grin. "Outstanding. I've got 50,000 credits riding on you with the Centauri Casino Network." "You bet on me?" Jake asked, touched. "Hell no, I bet against you. Seemed like easy money." McGillicuddy's grin faltered as he processed what Jake had just said. "Wait, did you say question 31? Question 31 materialized with ominous purpose. Calculate the probability of universe creation scenarios within an infinite multiverse framework, accounting for the observer paradox, quantum uncertainty, and the tendency of reality to surprise itself. Jake was now on his third piece of beef jerky and seemed to be hitting his stride. Universe creation is basically reality's hobby project. In an infinite multiverse, every possible universe exists, including the ones where universe creation is impossible, which creates a paradox that reality solves by not caring about paradoxes. The probability is infinity divided by infinity, which equals whatever the universe feels like at the moment. Correct. McGillicuddy stared at the confirmation display. Son of a, he caught himself before completing the phrase in mixed company. "Martinez, did you just solve theoretical cosmology?" "I guess," Jake shrugged. "It's not that complicated if you think about it like reality having multiple personalities." The crowd in the chamber had grown to include representatives from major universities, 3 different news networks, and a confused hot dog vendor who'd gotten lost looking for the food court. Everyone was glued to the holographic displays showing Jake's unprecedented progress. Question 35 dealt with omnidimensional chess theory. Jake solved it by explaining that any game involving infinite dimensions was basically just regular chess where all the pieces were having identity crises. Question 38 required candidates to reconcile the existence of free will with deterministic universe models. Jake's answer involved comparing reality to a really complicated video game where the NPCs thought they were the main characters. By question 42, Vex had stopped trying to understand what was happening and had moved on to chain-smoking Rigelian anxiety cigarettes. The purple smoke was making his skin shift through colors that didn't exist in standard physics textbooks. "This is impossible," he muttered for the 47th time. "The questions are generated by a computer that samples problems from across the entire galaxy. Some of these haven't been solved by civilizations that have been working on them for millennia." "Maybe that's the problem," Jake suggested helpfully. "Sometimes when you work on something too long, you forget to step back and look at the big picture." Question 43 appeared. Resolve the paradox of temporal causality in a universe where effect can precede cause, accounting for the psychological impact on observers who experience nonlinear time. Jake barely glanced at it. Time doesn't actually flow backward, it just gets confused sometimes. Like when you're driving and miss your exit, you're not actually going backward. You're just taking a longer route to where you were supposed to be. The psychological impact is basically the same as getting lost in a parking garage, except with more existential dread. Correct. Ashen. The hot dog vendor, who'd been following along with surprising interest, suddenly spoke up. "You know, that actually makes sense." "See," Jake said, "it's all about perspective." Griselda, who'd been frantically checking and rechecking the test parameters, approached with a mixture of awe and terror. "Mr. Martinez, do you realize you're now in completely uncharted territory? No being in recorded history has progressed this far." "Cool," Jake said. "What happens when I finish?" "Nobody knows," she admitted. "The test was designed to be impossible to complete." "That seems like poor planning," Jake observed. Question 45 materialized with what could only be described as desperate malevolence. Prove the existence of meaning in a universe where entropy ensures all achievements are temporary. Consciousness is an emergent property of meaningless matter, and the heat death of reality guarantees ultimate futility. The chamber fell silent. This wasn't just a test question. This was the kind of philosophical problem that kept entire civilizations awake at night. Jake finished his beef jerky and wiped his hands on his flight suit. "That's easy. Meaning doesn't have to be permanent to be real. A good meal isn't meaningless just because you'll be hungry again tomorrow. A beautiful sunset isn't pointless just because night is coming. And consciousness might be emergent, but so is music. And nobody calls music meaningless. The universe might end someday, but today isn't someday, and meaning is what happens in the space between now and then." Correct. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for religious experiences or really good pizza. The galaxy held its breath. Literally. On 17 different worlds, entire populations had stopped their daily activities to watch the live HomeNet feeds. The Intergalactic Council had called an emergency session. 3 different betting syndicates had gone bankrupt. And in a small testing chamber on Cerebellum Prime, a human named Jake Martinez was about to attempt something that mathematics suggested was impossible. Question 46 appeared not in cheerful holographic text, but in writing that seemed to bend reality around itself. Define the nature of absolute truth in a relativistic multiverse where the act of observation changes the observed, the observer, and the nature of observation itself. The testing computer's cheerful tone had been replaced by something that sounded distinctly nervous. Warning: this question operates outside normal logical parameters. Continued testing may result in localized reality distortion. Jake looked around the chamber, which was now packed with every major intellectual in the known galaxy. "Is that bad?" "We don't know," Vex admitted. His skin had cycled through the entire visible spectrum and was now displaying colors that hurt to look at. This test has never progressed this far. The theoretical framework suggests that these questions might not actually have answers in any meaningful sense. "Huh," Jake said. "Well, let's find out. Absolute truth is whatever's true regardless of who's looking at it or how they're looking at it. In a relativistic multiverse, that means absolute truth is the fact that everything is relative, including the relativity of relativity. The act of observation changes things, sure, but the fact that observation changes things is itself an absolute truth. So absolute truth is like the stage that all the relative truths perform on. The chamber shook. Not from any external force, but from reality itself having to stretch to accommodate Jake's answer. Correct, I think. Even the computer sounded confused now. Question 47 manifested as pure mathematics that seemed to exist in more dimensions than space actually had. This solve for x, where x equals the sum of all possible solutions to problems that cannot be solved, multiplied by the probability of impossibility, divided by the square root of paradox. Several faculty members had to be carried out on stretchers. The equation was so complex that looking at it directly caused spontaneous philosophy degrees. Jake squinted at the writhing mathematical chaos. Oh, this is one of those trick questions. X equals x, because the equation is asking what x equals, and if x is defined as all that stuff, then x equals all that stuff. It's like asking what does the word dog mean. The answer is dog. The equation is self-defining. Correct, somehow help. The computer was definitely panicking now. Admiral McGillicuddy was frantically updating his betting positions. Martinez, I've now got the entire Terran treasury riding on you winning this thing. Don't you dare stop now. No pressure, Jake muttered. Question 48 appeared as something that could only be described as a conceptual migraine, reconciled the existence of free will with the illusion of choice, the reality of determinism, the fantasy of randomness, and the possibility that none of these concepts actually exist. The question was so philosophically complex that 3 professors of advanced impossibility spontaneously achieved enlightenment and had to be hospitalized for excessive wisdom. Jake rubbed his temples. Okay, so free will, determinism, randomness, and choice are all different ways of describing the same thing. Stuff happens. Whether it's because you chose it, or because it was predetermined, or because the universe rolled some cosmic dice doesn't matter from the perspective of the stuff that happened. Free will is real because you experience making choices. Determinism is real because everything follows from something else. Randomness is real because you can't predict everything. And choice is real because you can see the effects of choosing. They're all true because they're all different angles on the same reality. Correct. Reality.exe has stopped responding. The computer was definitely having an existential crisis. Vex had given up trying to maintain his composure and was openly weeping purple tears. This is beyond unprecedented. This is impossible beyond impossibility. The questions are now generating themselves based on theoretical problems that may not actually exist. Question 49 materialized as pure concept, bypassing the normal channels of language and mathematics entirely. It planted itself directly in everyone's consciousness as the simultaneous experience of every unanswered question that had ever been asked, combined with the emotional weight of all possible disappointment. Most of the observers collapsed immediately. The question wasn't just difficult to answer, it was difficult to survive experiencing. Jake stood alone in the center of the chamber, surrounded by unconscious intellectuals and sparking computer equipment. He looked at question 49, which existed more as a feeling than a problem, and nodded slowly. I get it, he said quietly. This isn't actually a question. It's every question, which means it's not really asking anything specific. It's just asking me to acknowledge that questions exist. So my answer is, yes, questions exist, and that's okay. Not every question needs an answer. Sometimes the question is enough. Correct. Existence confirmed. Thank you for playing. The computer's voice was barely a whisper now. Question 50 appeared. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of reality holding its breath. This was it, the question that wasn't supposed to exist, the problem that could theoretically break the universe if solved incorrectly. The question was simple, elegant, and terrifying in its implications. What is the meaning of life? Jake stared at the question for a long moment. Around him, the few conscious observers waited for an answer that could reshape everything they understood about existence. Then Jake smiled. 42, Jake said. The testing computer made a sound like a digital sigh of relief. Correct. Test completed. Congratulations on achieving the impossible. The chamber erupted. Those who were still conscious cheered, wept, or fainted in roughly equal numbers. Admiral McGillicuddy was frantically calculating his winnings, which apparently now included ownership of several small moons. The Holnet reporters were screaming into their cameras about the greatest intellectual achievement in galactic history. But Jake held up his hand for silence, and surprisingly, the chaos died down. Before everyone gets too excited, he said, I should probably mention something. I knew this was a test the whole time. The silence that followed was so complete that you could hear the universe's gears grinding to a halt. You knew, Vex whispered. Well, yeah, I mean, come on. A facility called Cerebellum Prime with a test that's supposedly impossible? Giant warning signs about intellectual superiority? Questions that sound like they were written by a philosophy professor having a bad day? It was pretty obviously a test. Griselda's tentacles were twitching with confusion. Then why did you take it? Jake shrugged. Seemed rude to just leave after you guys went to all that trouble setting it up. Besides, my ship was getting refueled, and I had time to kill. But how? Vex demanded. How did you solve problems that have stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy? Jake looked genuinely puzzled by the question. I didn't solve them, exactly. I just answered them. Most of those questions were way overthought. Like once you strip away all the fancy language and impossible mathematics, they're basically asking simple stuff. What's the nature of reality? Reality is what's happening. How does consciousness work? Consciousness is what's asking the question. What's the meaning of life? Whatever you decide it is, plus 42 because that's funny. The revelation hit Vex like a cosmic freight train. You mean you weren't demonstrating superior intelligence? You were demonstrating. Common sense, Jake finished. Yeah, pretty much. Admiral McGillicuddy was staring at his datapad in disbelief. Martinez, according to this, you've just become the legal owner of the Centauri Banking Consortium. That seems excessive, Jake said. I was just taking a test. Griselda had been frantically searching through her archives during the conversation. Now she looked up with an expression of dawning horror. I found something. The original design specifications for this facility. They're in Terran script. What? Vex snatched the datapad from her tentacles. That's impossible. This facility predates human spaceflight by centuries. Actually, Jake said helpfully, it doesn't. See, humans have been in space a lot longer than most people think. We just kept it quiet because we figured you guys weren't ready for us yet. This whole facility, it was designed by my great-great-grandmother, Dr. Sarah Martinez, back in 2387. She was doing her doctoral thesis on advanced alien psychology and the humor potential of intellectual superiority complexes. The chamber was so quiet you could hear planets rotating. This entire facility, Jake continued, is basically an elaborate job interview. Grandma Sarah figured that any species advanced enough to build galactic civilizations but dumb enough to create an impossible test just to feel superior about themselves probably needed some human guidance. The test was designed to identify beings who could think outside conventional frameworks, problem solvers, people who don't get hung up on unnecessary complexity. Vex's skin had achieved a color that could only be described as defeated beige. A job interview? Yep. Congratulations, by the way, you all passed. Any species that can maintain a facility this elaborate just for the sake of intellectual pride clearly has the attention to detail necessary for middle management. And what about you? Griselda asked weakly. What happens to you now? Jake considered this. Well, technically I just inherited a bunch of space banks and probably have job offers from every major university in the galaxy. But honestly, I was thinking of opening a taco stand. A taco stand? Yeah, you know, Mexican food. I've been traveling around the galaxy for a while now. And the one thing everyone's missing is really good tacos. There's this spot on Kepler 442 billion with great foot traffic and reasonable rent. I figure I could make a fortune introducing proper Earth cuisine to alien palates. Admiral McGillicuddy shook his head in amazement. Martinez, you just solved the greatest intellectual challenge in galactic history, and you want to sell food? Good food, Jake corrected. There's a difference. Besides, I figure the galaxy could use more practical solutions and less impossible tests. Tacos are practical. Everyone needs to eat, and everyone deserves to eat something delicious. Vex slumped in his chair, his forearms hanging limply at his sides. 847 years of administering this test. 847 years of intellectual superiority. And it was all just a human job interview? A really good one, though, Jake said encouragingly. You guys did great work maintaining the illusion. Very professional. I'm sure Grandma Sarah would be proud. The hot dog vendor, who'd been quietly listening to the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. You know what? I think I'd like to try one of these tacos. Jake grinned. Now that's the kind of practical thinking the galaxy needs more of. And so it was that Jake Martinez, having completed the impossible test with nothing more than common sense and a healthy supply of beef jerky, declined offers to become Supreme Chancellor of Galactic Education, Head of Universal Philosophy, and Chief Executive of Applied Impossibility. Instead, he opened Jake's cosmic taco stand on Kepler 442 billion, which became the most popular restaurant in 3-star systems and spawned a chain that eventually brought affordable, delicious Mexican food to 17 different species. The Galactic Intelligence Testing Facility was converted into a community college offering practical courses in applied common sense, basic problem solving without overthinking, and advanced taco preparation. Vex Thornbottom became the dean and discovered that teaching practical skills was much more satisfying than crushing intellectual dreams. He also developed a surprising talent for making guacamole. And Jake? Jake learned that sometimes the most impossible problems have the simplest solutions, and the best way to change the galaxy isn't through superior intellect or cosmic wisdom, but it's through really good food and treating people with basic human decency. Plus, he never did find out what happened to that pilot's license renewal. But that's a story for another day.